The Sudanese civil war is increasingly looking like a bloodbath for civilians. Just why is no one in the global community trying to do essentially anything to stop this raging conflict? Even the US president is focused on a completely different African country. Just why isn't even Trump, Mr. War Stopper, trying to put an end to this conflict? Is it for exactly the reason you think it is? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So, Sudanese civil war. You guys might know that this is a conflict between essentially I'm going to sort of ballpark it here, but the Sudanese armed forces, the Sudanese military, and think of them as the National Guard, right? Both under separate commanders that for a time were co-presidents, but as you guys know, you can't have African co-dictators. There's one or there's none. That's how it goes. But the fighting between the Rapid Support Forces, the sort of National Guard-ish of Sudan, and the Sudanese Armed Forces, the Armed Forces of Sudan, has been going on since April 2023, and most estimates place about 150,000 people dead. And that's on the low end. Most estimates are actually higher than that. And so this is a tremendous rate. But what's troubling is that not only are we seeing more and more of a mentality in the fighting that focuses on punishing civilian populations, but we're seeing more and more of a when the other side takes over a town, they simply can commit mass killings. I don't know what else to tell you. And the RSF seems to be much worse about this sort of thing. Sudanese armed forces, again, given that they are the legitimate armed force of the country, seem less prone to this kind of behavior. But what's disturbing is that the RSF appears to be focusing on targeting ethnically different civilians, Arabs, so-called Sudanese Arabs versus Sudanese non-Arabs, sort of nomadic peoples versus sedentary peoples. It's, again, a very African conflict in which the external part looks like a civil war, but the internal part looks increasingly like a tribal conflict that has its roots for years prior. Right? So, but here's the problem. Is that one, in the last couple days, we have seen a massacre in a town called El Fasher. And El Fasher, right, was a Sudanese armed forces held town that fell to the RSF, leaving 250,000 people really unprotected. And many chose to flee across the open desert. Those that remained, of course, reportedly were killed without mercy. The first 3 days after capturing Al Fasher, the RSF killed about 1,500 people, including 460 hospital patients, right? As well as, and Al Jazeera actually verified and authenticated several videos showing RSF troops standing over a pile of dead bodies or executing row after row of unarmed young men. Of course, this video and this killing prompted another 30,000 people to flee, again, to nearby towns and villages nearly 40 miles away, often on foot. Most civilians, of course, are trapped in Al Fasher, hiding from RSF gunmen. So this is increasingly a frightening kind of trend because it shows that targeting civilians, targeting particularly ethnicities that are believed to support the Sudanese armed forces is increasingly normalized within the RSF. And what's even more troubling is not so much that the RSF is doing it, but that no one else is doing anything about it, right? And yeah, the UN says, oh, it's bad. Right? The United States says this is bad. But saying a thing is bad isn't really an effective plan to stop it. Again, I tell my 2-year-old that it's bad for her to walk up the stairs by herself, but I can't really say that I keep her safe unless I actively pick her up when she tries to start wandering up the stairs. She's actually a pretty good walker. But here's, if you're wondering, why can't the United States or Europe do anything about it? Well, the answer is pretty obvious, right? And when we look at foreign involvement, you can see that China is a supplier of weapons to the conflict, breaching a Darfur arms embargo, with Chinese manufactured arms being traced to both sides of the conflict. Right? Of course, China, right, playing both sides against each other so that they come out on top. Now, China initially adhered to a non-interference policy, but that's also what it said in Ukraine, and that turned to just be a deception, right? China's Sudan strategy ties to the Belt and Road Initiative, aiming to secure Red Sea trade routes and infrastructure links. And so the China just has a preference for a stable, cooperative government in Khartoum, and prioritizing economic continuity over ideological alignment. So they just simply want to see somebody come out on top. Egypt, by contrast, seems to be supporting the Sudanese armed forces, including providing them with fighter aircraft and pilots to conduct bombing operations. Right, the Sudanese armed forces, the only military with a functioning air force. You also have, of course, support for one side by Eritrea. Ethiopia, Iran, notably, is supplying both sides. But this is part of Iran's efforts to counter UAE influence in Sudan and secure access to the Red Sea. Right? Russia, of course, has been initially was selling arms to both sides, but then in mid-2024, the Russian government came in on the side of the SAF because the SAF said that Russia could get access to a naval base in the port of Sudan. Then, of course, that meant that the Wagner Group was deployed to Russia, and you can bet on the fact that wherever Wagner goes, Ukrainian special forces are going to hunt them down and kill them, right? Then, of course, you have Turkey selling weapons to both sides, particularly drones and drone munition support. But Turkey is also providing a training effort to boost the SAF. And of course, the UAE is the number one funder of the RSF, trying to counter both Saudi and Iranian influence in the region, right? The UAE's ties to the RSF date back to the Yemeni war. Now, what's notable is that the UAE, the Emirates, are huge allies of the Trump administration, right? Let's see if we can just get a nice AI summary here, right? Right? They were partners on Trump's Abraham Accords, a lot of business and crypto deals, and a lot of investments, including arms sales, right? So we've sold about $1.4 billion of equipment to the UAE, and then they turn around and gave that to the Rapid Support Forces. So again, a lot of Trump companies are headquartered or invested in by the UAE. UAE has become the largest foreign investor in the Trump real estate and other businesses. UAE gets access to advanced American AI chips. And again, also the UAE is supposedly behind a lot of the stablecoin issuance. And again, the $2 billion that was put into World Liberty Financial, the crypto scam run by Steve Witkoff's kids, Witkoff and Trump families. So the UAE, who is funding the Rapid Support Forces, has a huge incentive to not have the U.S. take a side here. Right now, the U.S. and U.K. have called on the UAE to help halt support, but that's pretty hilarious, because, well, again, it's hard to credibly say that the UAE. It's one thing to say, UAE, you shouldn't be doing this. You're being a bad boy, but then the next day you're taking $2 billion from the UAE, right? So, I think the takeaway here is, again, that you have major foreign powers, a number of them, really leaning heavily into this. But especially, I think, Saudi Arabia supporting the SAF, and you have, again, the UAE supporting the RSF. So for the United States, they need a positive relationship with both of those individuals. And so the U.S., of course, given its commitment to human rights and its disgust at war crimes taking place, has a strong stance about what's happening in Nigeria. That's right, because President Trump watched a Fox News segment in which they cited some really questionable sources and some really sketchy numbers, claiming that there was actually a series of a genocide taking place against Christians in Nigeria. Now, this is weird for a bunch of reasons, but one, you can't have a genocide against Christians because it's right there in the name, genocide. It has to be like an ethnicity. It has to have some kind of genetic component. So it's just sparkling sectarian killing if you're targeting a religious group. But it's not even clear that the religious group is being targeted. Not that that stops President Trump from going on an absolute midnight rant, screaming about the Nigerian government, which, by the way, the U.S. Has been supporting for literally years in their fight against Islamist insurgents like Boko Haram. It's literally been a decade plus, right? And now he says we very well may go into that now disgraced country. Not a great way to talk about your ally and partner. Guns ablazing, he says, to completely wipe the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. FYI, guys, if you were living under a rock for the last 20 years, what he's describing is a counterinsurgency campaign a la Iraq and Afghanistan. Those obviously went great. He said, I'm hereby instructing our Department of War to prepare for possible action. If we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet. Aw. That's nice. Just like the terrorist thugs that attacked our cherished Christians. Huh. Weird. Who's cherished Christians? We, the United States government, cherishes Christians? I mean, but do they also kill Muslims? Do we have cherished Muslims? No, we don't. Of course not. U.S. military, of course, following its instructions to draw up plans to hit the Boko Haram terrorists with drone strikes or something. But, you know, the fact is that, well, the only way to even attempt to fully dislodge Boko Haram would be a massive military counterinsurgency effort, and we know that doesn't work. Right? And the other part that's kind of absurd is that the two bases where we could launch air operations, the United States actually abandoned in the first Trump term, and now Russia has taken them over. Right? So the U.S. military in August vacated its two nearest drone bases to Nigeria in Niger. Russian forces now occupy those bases. Whoops! Looks like somebody needs to talk about their force posture. Right? Now, of course, for the U.S. to launch any kind of strikes, it would have to launch them from literally southern Europe. Now, the real question, though, is how bad is it, right? Trump seems pretty mad about this and pretty quiet about his allies butchering people in Sudan. Well, maybe it's just as bad, right? But when BBC tried to run it down, the actual number of Christians killed, the actual number of total civilians, right? Since 2009, about 50,000 civilians, Muslims and Christians, have been reported killed in political violence in Nigeria. That's a large number, but that's since 2009, guys. That's 16 years of data. So you're looking at more like 4,000 or 5,000 people a year. For context, Nigeria has a population of 220 million. So again, over the last 5 years, there's been about 20,000 civilians killed in all kinds of attacks. So you're seeing just really small numbers, right? And the BBC was only able to find about 350 incidents where Christians were specifically targeted over the last 5 years, and 317 people died. So it doesn't mean that Christians aren't being targeted, but again, one charity that does violence monitoring found that in Nigeria there were 3,100 Christians who were killed in a 12-month period. There were also 2,300 Muslims. But obviously, President Trump, these are not our cherished Muslims, only our cherished Christians whose lives matter. Now, this it's hard to get this data full stop, and it's also hard to know, right, where ethnic tensions end and just, you know, an Islamist insurgency begins, right? That we know that the Taliban right? We're happy to describe the U.S. Forces as infidels, but 90% of their killing was targeted against their fellow Muslims, their fellow Afghans and Iraqis. And so I think the story here really is one of more just kind of distraction, man. Those Epstein files must just be absolutely horrible for Trump. Again, and this is somebody who says, listen, I am a peacemaker, I'm a war ender. But again, you see that the wars he inherited, he really is powerless to end, right? He mostly pats himself on the back for ending tiny skirmishes, dust ups that never really were going to be conflagrations or serious conflicts anyway. All the ones that are serious, bloody, and difficult to end that require real diplomacy and real U.S. leverage, the president seems unwilling or unable to actually step in and do anything. The only exception, of course, is Gaza, as we've talked about. Just like somehow the broken clock was right twice a day, where he just sort of his people, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, really walked out with a really sophisticated, elaborate, credible deal. And the administration's working, I mean, pretty tirelessly to keep Israel and Hamas on the path of righteousness. It's just kind of so, it's the most bizarre thing to just see in one random aspect to be like, oh, in this way, you guys are like committed to serious diplomacy. It's so bizarre. Anyway, guys, hit subscribe. You guys can become members at combatvetnews.com. And you can also become a member just by hitting the YouTube membership button below. Select one of the $5 or $15 tiers or $5 tiers or above. That'll get you access to Combat Vet News. We'll get you a login, and you'll have access to all of the videos. Thanks to Sergei Zinchenko, Thomas Anderson, William Alexenko, Georgiev, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks so much. We'll see you in the next one. Cheers.